Well, folks, thanks for tuning in today. We've got a ton of news to look at, giving you some of the insights behind the headlines so you can really have a understanding of what's going on and save you hours of doom scrolling. Thanks for the comments that keep coming in, and thanks for the good advice. Our viewers, listeners in Canada and the U.S., we appreciate that a lot. Let's jump right into it. One of the things coming out of the Iran situation, and all networks are actually talking about this, is the amount of fake news that the Iranians are pushing out there, even with videos showing their missiles hitting different sites. Now, make no mistake about it, Iranian missiles are firing, the drones are carrying, and it is causing damage. But Iranian propaganda really going out there, so check carefully. Many of the mainstream media outlets in Canada and the US don't strain that out. They don't take into effect the amount of propaganda videos coming out of Iran, so keep that in mind. Even the whole effect of it seems to be much of the media in the Western world does not want to admit that maybe the war is going pretty well. Maybe Iran is, at least their awful regime is teetering. For instance, we keep hearing, I said yesterday that the price of oil was not really rocketing up as much as everybody thought. Even I had predicted we could see it as high as 150 to 120. Yesterday it was 96 to $98. That's Brent price per barrel. And I looked at headlines early today that said oil price surging, and I thought, wow, I guess it's shot right up to 120 or 150. And then I looked behind the headline, it's actually edged up from $98 a barrel to $101 a barrel. So we'd like to see it lower, obviously, but during a war it's going to go up somewhat, but it is not rocketing up the way many media outlets are saying, and maybe even the way that they're hoping. They would like to see it, the war going worse than it is. But anyway, let's just keep an eye on that. And we see that Iran is, of course, lashing out even against its Muslim neighbors. Bahrain has been hit now, not disastrously, but everywhere they turn, Iran is firing now on their own potential allies in desperation. We also see an interesting development in NATO. NATO countries for the third time now have fired and shot down Iranian missiles and drones. So it's not just the US and Israel warring against Iran, but in fact NATO countries are jumping in. That's because in their wild, crazy lashing out, Iran has fired missiles to and into Turkey. And so in doing their insane moves, really, they are turning their own Arab nations against them. Iran is doing this, and even turning NATO against them by firing on NATO targets. So we're watching that with interest. When you look at different newscasts too, it's important that you don't just look at one. If you're just looking at Fox, you need to also look at CNN. If you're just looking at CBC, well, I don't know, there's probably no help for you, but you need to be looking at wider sources. CNN yesterday and over the last 2 days, not one mention of the fact, they are mentioning the fact that Israel is firing at certain targets in Lebanon, but they don't mention that in the last 4 days, Hezbollah, situated in Lebanon, and that's because of Iran, right? Iran has financed Hezbollah terrorists for years in Lebanon, and from Lebanon soil, Hezbollah has fired 220 different attacks into Israel, and amazing that a network as large as CNN could not even do one mention of those attacks coming daily out of Lebanon from Hezbollah. Well, there's an announcement today that Marines have indeed been at least sent to the region. President Trump had said there would be no boots on the ground. We're going to see where this goes. There's speculation that because of Iran having so much of its missile capability completely destroyed, that to control the Straits of Hormuz, or to try and at least put fear into ships going down the Straits of Hormuz, that you might see Iranian Guard, IRGC, actually being on the ground near the strait itself and firing directly, even possibly shoulder-fired weapons at any ships there. Marines might be going in there to deter that activity. We're going to wait and see. Well, in the EU, again, in another turn, in terms of policy that mainstream media doesn't like. The EU Committee on Immigration has voted, they've taken a vote on what's called the return regulation. The return regulation, this would mean that EU countries, because they agree on things among themselves, would have much more ability to deport illegal immigrants, to deport those who are asking for refugee status, and it turns out they're violent criminals. So that's a bit of a turn, actually a significant turn from the EU countries. Now that particular regulation, now that it's passed in their committee, will go eventually, and probably not for another month or two, to all of the EU Parliament, so that they can, this is the first step in this kind of direction in decades, but it would agree that European countries can deport illegal immigrations. They've had huge problem, especially with illegal Islamist-based immigrants coming in, causing all kinds of havoc. So there's an interesting shift there. Well, we've got an ambassador now saying that Canada is the global center of anti-Semitism. For those of us who are Canadians, regardless how you feel about the conflict, that's not a very happy title to be tagged with. Canada becoming the global center for anti-Semitism, and at the same time, as you know, we've reported on this, Canada is also the global center, the world leader in doctor-assisted suicides, or depending what angle you're taking at it, doctor-assisted death, medical-assisted death. And the numbers are staggering. More and more reports, even over the last few days, about how doctors moving with unseeming haste, undue haste to eliminate people. They do a quick ask, maybe say you want us to assist your death, and many times families not being fully informed. So if you don't like that direction of being seen as the most anti-Semitic and the fastest to have doctors killing old people, then maybe you want to think about who you're voting for, because the federal Liberals are really pushing these directions. China has just announced, I'm going to mention a few countries here. These are all countries that have radically changed their direction just since Trump has started his push, not just against Iran, but against regimes that are exporting, whether it's drugs or other terrible things. So look at what, and the media can hardly, they don't see a pattern here. They're not even willing to see a pattern that Trump is maybe having an effect worldwide, an effect that just may be positive. So as I mentioned a couple of these countries, you can ask yourself, use this as a bit of a litmus test to see if you have what's called Trump derangement syndrome. That can basically be summed up by the question, if Trump did come up with a pill that cured cancer, would you take it? A lot of people who have Trump derangement syndrome cannot attribute anything possibly beneficial to anything Trump does. Now, I don't agree with everything President Trump does, and I certainly don't agree with the tariffs, but take a look at this. Isn't it interesting how, because he's announced he's going to be visiting China at the end of the month, and that's not too long from now, China has already reduced its flights over and around and near Taiwan, and they've reduced their Navy. They like to send warships tantalizingly close to Taiwan's maritime borders, and they have really reduced their presence around Taiwan. Interesting, the effect that Trump seems to have. Look at this. The president of Cuba, Diaz-Canel, has announced that he is actually, they are trying to, and they are pursuing diplomatic relations with U.S. This is the first time since Castro, and I want to just touch on some of the things they're going to do, but it goes right in line with what the president of Bolivia has just announced. Rodrigo Paz has announced that they are now cooperating with the Drug Enforcement Group out of the U.S., the DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency. They stopped all communications with the DEA over 20 years ago, and they have now switched that. They're going to help to get rid of their drug-killing drug lords. They have allowed, there's visas now to get in and out quickly out of Bolivia, ongoing talks. So the Trump effect seems to be working to a degree. In Cuba, they have, because one of the things the Trump administration has said is you've got to stop having these political prisoners. They've released 52 political prisoners, And Trump again pushing, say, look, we'll normalize relations, but you've got to change your laws which make it illegal to publicly dissent against the government. Hey, you know what? Canada should be listening to that. Canada's going ahead with Bill C9, which is making discussion about religious texts illegal. And here, Cuba opening up. And why is it happening? Well, it all started when, of course, the Trump regime went into Venezuela and kidnapped Maduro and stopped the oil flow to Cuba. Once these dictators in these countries don't have the means to control the citizens, and once the citizens start starving and start freezing because they don't have any oil, these regimes slowly start to wake up and smell the coffee, as we can say. And so we see some progress going on in a number of different countries. In the streets of Caracas, the capital of Venezuela, people seen on the streets actually still celebrating, opening small businesses, being able to conduct their lives, and noticeable changes that are happening there. Well, at the same time in Canada, there's more reports out today, growing lineups in our hospitals, in our emergency zones, in the emergency treatment, growing lineups for surgery that we would have thought would be you wouldn't have to wait a year or sometimes 2 years for in terms of a hip replacement. And it just makes me wonder, when are politicians in Canada going to work up the nerve to say Canada's medical system, our so-called free Medicare system, is simply not working? It could use huge improvements. No, I'm not talking about radical capitalization or capitalist theory being applied to medicine, but there needs to be some of that. There needs to be a look at, again, why is Canada the only jurisdiction in the non-communist world to only allow one means to one laneway, one avenue to access health care, and that's through the public system, so there is no competition. Citizens don't get the opportunity seeing improved innovations and breakthroughs in medical care as they do in other areas. There's a way to do this. There's a way you can still have health care in Canada being made universal and at no charge to the individual, but you have to open up the delivery systems and allow for more entrepreneurial approach to delivery of healthcare in Canada. It is just simply cratering, and the reports are getting worse. Talking about Canada, thumbs up to Natalie Wilkie over there at the Paralympics. She's just won her second gold in biathlon. That's a tremendous accomplishment, and doing it again in those terrible working or competing conditions. As I said yesterday on the podcast, it's crazy that these Paralympics have to be competing in warm springtime temperatures. CBC trying to blame that on climate change. No, it's not climate change. As you saw yesterday, I posted the 50-year average of high daytime temperature in March in Milan. It's 61 degrees Fahrenheit or 16 degrees centigrade. For a Winter Olympics, that's crazy. It needs to be moved. Please, next time, for all athletes, and especially for the Paralympians, let's have the Winter Olympics during winter and not during spring and summertime. Well, media, again, in terms of what they do and what they don't report, you'll recall the reports about bombs, a couple of homemade bombs being thrown at the residence called Gracie Mansion of Mayor Mamdani in New York. And when I first read that, I was upset because what it said, the reports all went like this. They talked about this apparently radical right-wing, whatever that means, protest outside the mayor's house, about 50 people, and then it talked about bombs being thrown. And even I was preparing to post about saying whether it's right-wing or left-wing, there's no time, no excuse for violence, and I was about to condemn this group. I don't even know who they are. And it's taken 3 days now, moving into the fourth day, where some media are finally saying, actually, it wasn't the protesters outside. It was two guys shouting, Allahu Akbar, how about Allah is great, as they threw their bombs. These were Muslim terrorists. They've both been arrested. They've admitted who they are, but even mainstream media refusing to admit and trying to tie it to these the so-called right-wing group. Well, that's not the only bad news for New York City. Moody's is what is called a rating agency. They rate the financial capability of states or provinces or countries. They give a grading, and the rate that Moody's will give you will affect the cost of which that particular government can borrow money. They have downgraded New York City. They have said New York City's runaway debt and their plan to heap on more taxes has downgraded their actual borrowing rating. Look, I know it is to deal with a group like Moody's. Minister of Finance in Ontario, they literally come to your jurisdiction, whether it's a state, a province, or a country. They send in their economic experts. They go over all of your budget stuff. They meet with your budget officials. They met with me as Minister of Finance, and then they go back and they publish. They give you a rating. The higher or the worse your rating means the higher the costs are going to be for you as a government to borrow money. That means inflation. That means increased grocery costs. And when you look at grocery costs in general, when you look at inflation in general, please keep in mind, I've said this before, I'll say it again, the single biggest cause of inflation, there are other factors, the single biggest cause is always governments increasing spending by using borrowed money. That always forces up the price of money and the price of borrowing and makes things worse for their citizens. Well, yesterday I talked about reports about Bible sales increasing over 19% just the last year in the UK, also in the US. And now the reports are that TikTok, which has always been accused of being a means of influencing especially young people onto severely leftist thinking, especially with the Chinese connection, being reported now that there's there's a breakthrough in the increased number of people of faith, so-called Christian influencers, who are publishing biblical texts and publishing different testimonial material and having some significant and measurable effect on TikTokers out there, principally Gen Z, that would be Gen Z in the US. Folks, thanks for tuning in today. See you tomorrow. Keep those comments coming. They're very helpful to me. Thank you.